The old Victorian house stood on a quiet, tree-lined street in rural Maine, its paint faded and its porch sagging slightly. Sarah pulled her dusty sedan into the overgrown driveway, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. This was it, her new beginning. After the loss of her husband, this house, inherited from her grandmother, felt like the only place left to go. A place to rebuild, a place for her and 8-year-old Ethan to find some semblance of peace. Stepping inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and disuse. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grime-covered windows, casting long shadows. Across the hardwood floors, furniture draped in white sheets stood like ghostly figures in the dim light. It was a far cry from their cozy suburban home, but Sarah tried to focus on the potential. As she explored the living room, a peculiar sight caught her eye. On the dusty floor, a set of footprints trailed from the center of the room towards a dark corner near the fireplace. They were distinct, clearly visible in the thick layer of dust. Sarah frowned, a shiver running down her spine. She had just swept the room before bringing in the first box. How could they have appeared so quickly? She brushed it off, attributing it to dust drifting back in, or perhaps her own imagination playing tricks on her in the unfamiliar surroundings. She grabbed the broom again, sweeping the footprints away, determined to make this dusty old house a home. Later that evening, after unpacking a few boxes and making a makeshift dinner, Sarah tucked Ethan into bed in his new room. The room was small, but it had a large window overlooking the backyard, which Ethan seemed to like. As she kissed him goodnight, he whispered, "Mommy, I hear things." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her heart sinking. "What kind of things, sweetie?" "Whispers," he replied, his voice barely audible. "Like someone's talking, but I can't understand what they're saying." Sarah tried to reassure him. "It's just the house settling, honey. Old houses make all sorts of noises." But a nagging feeling of unease lingered in her mind. She remembered the footprints from earlier, the way they had appeared so inexplicably. The following morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of Ethan crying. She rushed to his room to find him huddled under his blankets, his face pale. "The whispers were louder last night," he sobbed. And I saw something in the corner." Sarah held him close, trying to soothe him. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Had she made a mistake moving them here? The isolation of the house, the lingering dust, the strange occurrences. It was all starting to weigh heavily on her. As she carried Ethan downstairs for breakfast, she noticed something on the living room floor. There, in the same spot as before, were the footprints. But this time, they led not just to the dark corner by the fireplace, but directly towards the door leading to the basement. A chill ran down her spine, a cold dread settling deep within her. The whispers, the footprints. It was more than just an old house settling. The reappearance of the footprints, now leading to the basement, sent a shiver of genuine fear through Sarah. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself it was just dust being tracked in from outside. But the logic felt flimsy. The basement door was always kept closed. Taking a deep breath, she decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, she descended the creaking wooden stairs into the dimly lit basement. The air was damp and cold, and the smell of mildew hung heavy in the air. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, illuminating cobwebs that draped across pipes and forgotten boxes. As she swept the light across the concrete floor, she saw them. The footprints. They were clearer down here, distinct impressions in the thick layer of dust. They led deeper into the basement, towards a far corner shrouded in shadow. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She hesitated, a sense of dread washing over her. Pushing aside a stack of old newspapers, she discovered a small wooden door built into the foundation wall. It was partially hidden, almost as if someone had intentionally tried to conceal it. The footprints led directly to it, with trembling, Hands. Sarah reached for the rusty handle and pulled the door open. It creaked inward, revealing a small, dark space. As she shone her flashlight inside, she saw nothing but more dust and cobwebs. But then her light caught something else. A faded, leather-bound photo album lying on the dusty floor. Picking it up, she brushed off the dust and opened it. Inside were old photographs of a family, presumably the previous owners of the house. One photo in particular caught her attention. It was a picture of a young boy, no older than Ethan, with a solemn expression on his face. He stood in front of what looked like the very same fireplace in the living room, a small wooden toy clutched in his hand. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The boy's eyes seemed to stare directly at her, a silent plea in their depths. The photograph of the young boy haunted Sarah. She couldn't shake the feeling that it held a key to the strange occurrences in the house. The next day, while Ethan was occupied with his video games, Sarah decided to visit the local library. The small brick building was a comforting contrast to the imposing Victorian house. She explained her situation to the librarian, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Davison, mentioning the old house and her desire to learn about its history. Mrs. Davison's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're living in the old Blackwood place," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She led Sarah to a dusty section of local history archives. After a few minutes of searching, she pulled out a thick, bound volume. "This has records of all the properties in the area," she explained. Flipping through the pages, she stopped at a section detailing the Blackwood family. Sarah's heart pounded as she read about the tragic accident that had occurred in the house decades ago. A young boy named Billy Blackwood had died after falling down the basement stairs during a severe thunderstorm. The details were brief, but the impact was profound. Leaving the library, Sarah felt a heavy weight in her chest. The whispers, the footprints, the boy in the photograph, it all started to make a chilling kind of sense. As she drove back to the house, she noticed a woman tending her garden across the street. She had seen her before, but hadn't had a chance to properly introduce herself. Hoping for some neighborly connection, Sarah pulled over. "Hello," she called out. "I'm Sarah. I just moved into the old Blackwood place." The woman's smile faltered, and her eyes darted away. She mumbled a quick hello and turned back to her flowers, pointedly ignoring Sarah. A cold feeling settled in Sarah's stomach. It was as if the woman knew something she wasn't saying, something dark about the house and its past. When Sarah entered the house, she noticed the footprints again. This time, they weren't just dusty, they were damp, as if someone had just walked in from the rain. And they led directly to Ethan's room, the damp footprints leading to Ethan's room filled Sarah with a growing sense of dread. She rushed upstairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She found Ethan sitting on his bed, his eyes wide with terror. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I saw him." "Saw who?" "Honey?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside him and pulling him into a comforting embrace. "The boy," Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on a point in the corner of the room. "He was standing there in the hallway. He just looked at me." Sarah held him tighter, trying to reassure him. "It was just a shadow, sweetie. Your imagination playing tricks on you." But she could see the genuine fear in his eyes, and a part of her knew it was more than that. Later that night, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep, Sarah sat in the living room, the old photo album open on her lap. She stared at the picture of Billy Blackwood, his sad eyes seeming to bore into her soul. She imagined him as a living child, playing in this very house, unaware of the tragic fate that awaited him. A wave of empathy washed over her. She understood what it was like to lose someone you loved, the emptiness and the lingering pain. Suddenly, a cold gust of air swept through the room, causing the hairs on the back of her neck to stand on end. She looked up and saw a faint shadow, flicker across the wall. Then she heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, but clear enough to send a chill down her spine. It sounded like a child's voice, calling out a single word. Ethan. The whisper seemed to come from just outside Ethan's bedroom door. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever was haunting this house was now directly focused on her son. The whisper of Ethan's name solidified Sarah's fear. This wasn't just an old house making noises. It was something more, something connected to the tragic history of the Blackwood family. The next morning, determined to understand more, Sarah ventured back down into the damp basement. The air was even colder than before, and a strange, musty odor hung in the air. She carefully navigated through the clutter, her flashlight beam dancing across the dusty surfaces. She returned to the small hidden room she had discovered earlier. As she knelt down, her hand brushed against something on the floor. It was a small wooden toy, a hand-carved horse with one broken leg. It was identical to the toy Billy Blackwood held in the old photograph. As Sarah picked it up, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. Images flashed before her eyes. A dark, stormy night, a terrified child running through the house, a loud crash, and then darkness. The vision was brief but intense, leaving her breathless and shaken. She dropped the toy as if it were burning her hand. The experience confirmed her worst fears. Billy's spirit was still trapped in the house, reliving his final moments. Back upstairs, the atmosphere in the house had become noticeably heavier. Objects seemed to move on their own, a book falling off a shelf, a door creaking open. Sarah felt constantly watched, a chilling sensation of an unseen presence lurking just beyond her peripheral vision. The whispers returned, more frequent now, sometimes sounding like a child's cries, other times like hushed conversations just out of earshot. And the footprints, they were everywhere, not just on the floors anymore, but now appearing on the walls, even on the ceiling, as if the unseen presence was no longer bound by gravity. The terror was escalating, and Sarah knew. She had to do something before it was too late. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The house was alive with unseen activity. The whispers were constant, and the shadows danced in the corners of her eyes. She lay in bed, listening to Ethan's soft breathing in the next room, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Suddenly, she heard a distinct sound coming from Ethan's room, a soft sob. She bolted upright and rushed to his room, her heart pounding in her chest. As she opened the door, she gasped, standing by Ethan's bed, bathed in the pale moonlight streaming. Through the window was a figure. It was a young boy, pale and translucent, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. It was Billy Blackwood. He wasn't menacing or frightening in the traditional sense. He simply looked lost and alone. Sarah stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. Ethan stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. Billy's gaze shifted from Ethan to Sarah, and a wave of intense emotion washed over her. It wasn't fear, but a profound sense of sorrow, a deep understanding of his pain. In that moment, she understood. He wasn't trying to harm them. He was simply trapped, reliving his final moments, desperately seeking connection. As she looked at him, fragmented images flashed through her mind, clearer than before. She saw Billy playing in the house, laughing and carefree. Then the storm, the power outage, the fear. She saw him stumbling in the dark, lost and disoriented, reaching out for something, anything, to hold on to. And then, the fall. The image of him tumbling down the steep basement stairs was vivid and horrifying. She saw the fear in his eyes, the confusion, the pain. The vision ended, leaving Sarah breathless and tears streaming down her face. She looked back at Billy, her heart aching for him. He looked back at her, his spectral form flickering slightly, as if acknowledging her presence, her understanding. The connection was undeniable. Sarah felt a deep empathy for Billy, a shared understanding of loss and grief. She wasn't facing a malevolent spirit, but a lost child, trapped between worlds, desperately clinging to the only place he knew. She took a tentative step closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Billy?" His spectral form flickered again as if responding to his name. He didn't speak, but his sad eyes remained fixed on her, a silent plea in their depths. Sarah felt a surge of compassion, a mother's instinct to comfort a child in distress. She thought of Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his bed, and imagined the horror of losing him. The pain was unbearable to contemplate. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're not alone." She reached out a hand, hesitantly, towards his translucent form. As her fingers brushed against the cold air where he stood, another wave of images flooded her mind. This time, they weren't just fragments of Billy's memories, but a complete picture of his final moments. She saw him wandering through the darkened house during the storm, calling for his mother, his small voice lost in the howling wind. She saw him stumble in the darkness, his hand slipping from the banister, the terrifying fall down the basement stairs. The vision ended, leaving Sarah shaken but resolute. She understood now. Billy wasn't trying to scare them, he was trying to show them, to make them understand what had happened. He was trapped, not by malice, but by unfinished business, by the lingering pain of his tragic death. "You don't have to stay here, Billy," she said, her voice now firm but gentle. "It's okay to let go, it's okay to move on." She thought of her own husband, the pain of his loss still fresh, but also the gradual acceptance that had come with time. "It's okay," she repeated, tears streaming down her face. "You're not forgotten." As Sarah spoke, a change came over Billy's spectral form. The sadness in his eyes began to soften, replaced by a look of understanding, almost of relief. The flickering of his image slowed, becoming more stable, more solid. A soft, warm light began to emanate from him, filling the room with a gentle glow. Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her, a calming sensation that eased the tension that had gripped her since moving into the house. She continued to speak to him, her voice soft and soothing, telling him it was all right to let go, that his family missed him, that he wasn't alone. She spoke of the light, of a place where he could finally be at peace. As she spoke, Billy's form began to fade, the warm light growing brighter, enveloping him completely. The room grew warmer, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a heavy fog, dissipating in the morning sun. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Billy was gone. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft breathing of her sleeping son. Sarah stood there for a moment, tears still streaming down her face. But now they were tears of relief, of understanding, of closure. She felt a profound sense of calm, a feeling that the house was finally at peace. She looked down at the floor where Billy had stood and noticed something else. The footprints, which had been appearing all over the house, were gone. Not just in Ethan's room, but everywhere. The house felt lighter, cleaner, as if a great weight had been lifted. The following morning, Sarah woke with a sense of lightness. She hadn't felt in months. The house felt different, the oppressive atmosphere replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. Even Ethan seemed more at ease, waking up with a smile and no mention of whispers or shadows. They had breakfast together in the sunny kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the clean windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Ordinary dust motes, not ghostly footprints. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah and Ethan began to settle into their new life. Sarah started to unpack the remaining boxes, transforming the old house into a home. Ethan made friends at school, and the sound of his laughter filled the rooms, chasing away the lingering echoes of the past. The house, once a source of fear and unease, now felt like a sanctuary, a place of healing and new beginnings. One afternoon, while Sarah was tending to the small garden in the backyard, She felt a gentle breeze brush against her face. It was a warm, comforting sensation, almost like a gentle touch. She closed her eyes for a moment, a faint smile playing on her lips. She knew deep down that it was Billy, letting her know that he was finally at peace. The house was no longer haunted, but it carried a memory, a reminder of the importance of compassion and understanding. Sarah and Ethan had found a new beginning in the old Victorian house, a beginning born from a shared experience with a lost soul who had finally found his way home.